The video went viral within hours. Security camera footage from Murphy's Corner store showed everything in brutal clarity. 23-year-old Marcus Caprio, dressed in an expensive suit, shoving 71-year-old Korean War veteran Walter Green against a display shelf. The elderly man's cane clattered to the floor as he crumpled, his head striking the corner of the counter. Blood. Confusion. And Marcus Caprio walking away without a backward glance. Walter Green had spent 40 years running that corner store in Millbrook, a small town where everyone knew everyone. He'd served his country with honor, raised 3 children after his wife passed, and never once closed his shop, even during the worst storms. Kids called him Mr. Walt. Adults called him a pillar of the community. The incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had stormed into the store demanding cigarettes, clearly intoxicated. When Walter politely asked him to wait his turn behind another customer, Marcus exploded. "Do you know who I am?" he'd shouted. "Do you know who my father is?" Witnesses said Marcus grabbed Walter by his collar, called him a worthless old man, and shoved him violently when the veteran tried to defend himself. The impact left Walter with a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, and a fractured wrist. By Wednesday morning, the local news had picked up the story. By Wednesday evening, it was national. The grandson of a beloved veteran, brutally assaulted by the privileged son of Police Chief Richard Caprio, one of the most powerful men in the county. The police chief's office released a brief statement. "The matter is being investigated thoroughly. No one is above the law." But anonymous sources leaked a different story. Text messages, phone calls, whispered conversations about making this go away quietly. About protecting the Caprio name. About the victim being just an old man who would probably take some money and forget about it. The leaked recording was the breaking point. In it, Marcus could be heard laughing with friends. "That old bastard thought he could talk to me like that? My dad will handle it. He always does. By next week, nobody will even remember this happened." Millbrook erupted. Protests formed outside the courthouse. Veterans groups demanded justice. The national media descended on the small town like locusts, transforming a local tragedy into a symbol of everything wrong with privilege and power. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. Marcus Caprio hired the most expensive defense attorney money could buy. His social media went silent. His father stopped appearing at public events. And Walter Green, recovering slowly in his daughter's home, told reporters he just wanted the boy to understand what he did was wrong. The courthouse scheduled extra security. Every seat in the gallery was claimed days in advance. The prosecution prepared meticulously. The defense prepared to dismantle Walter's character, to question his memory, to suggest he'd exaggerated his injuries. But a revelation was brewing, one that nobody, not even Marcus Caprio's expensive lawyers, saw coming. But an unexpected revelation was about to change everything in the courtroom. Judge Margaret Thornton had presided over criminal cases for 23 years. She'd seen every type of defendant, the remorseful, the broken, the defiant, the calculating. But she'd rarely seen someone quite like Marcus Caprio. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. People stood along the walls. Reporters filled an entire section, cameras prohibited but notebooks flying. Veterans in uniform sat in silent solidarity behind Walter Green's family. The air hummed with tension and barely restrained anger. Judge Thornton entered at exactly 9 a.m., her black robe crisp, her silver hair pulled back severely, her expression unreadable. She was a small woman with a command that filled the entire room. "All rise." The shuffle of feet. The creak of old wooden benches. Then silence. "You may be seated." Marcus Caprio entered through the side door, flanked by his legal team. He wore an immaculate navy suit, his dark hair styled perfectly, his expression a carefully constructed mask of bored inconvenience. As if this was all an unfortunate misunderstanding that would be cleared up before lunch. He didn't look at Walter Green, didn't acknowledge the veterans glaring at him, didn't show even a flicker of remorse. The State of California versus Marcus Caprio, Judge Thornton announced. Charges: felony assault, battery causing serious bodily injury, and elder abuse. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. The video footage, played on screens throughout the courtroom, showed everything in devastating detail. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery when Walter hit the counter. Several people wiped their eyes. The medical reports were damning: concussion, fractured ribs, broken wrist, ongoing trauma. Walter's doctor testified that the injuries were severe for a man of his age and health condition. Then came the witnesses. The teenage clerk who'd called 911. The customer who'd tried to help Walter. The paramedics who'd found him conscious but confused, bleeding from a head wound. Throughout it all, Marcus sat with his arms crossed, occasionally whispering to his attorney, his expression never changing from mild disdain. When the defense's turn came, they went on the attack. "Mr. Green," the defense attorney began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "isn't it true you've had balance issues for years? That you've fallen multiple times?" Walter, sitting in the witness box with his arm still in a cast, met the attorney's eyes steadily. "I fell once. 3 years ago. Ice on my front steps. But you use a cane. For my knee. War injury. I managed just fine." "You managed just fine," the attorney repeated mockingly. "Mr. Green, isn't it possible you simply lost your balance and fell, and in your confusion you blamed my client?" The courtroom erupted. Judge Thornton's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order. I will have order." But Walter remained calm, his weathered face dignified despite the attack. "Son," he said quietly, "I was a Marine. I know the difference between falling and being shoved by a man half my age. I know what I saw in that young man's eyes. And I know violence when I experience it." His voice never wavered. His dignity never cracked. The defense tried another angle. They brought up Walter's modest income, suggesting he was exaggerating his injuries for a settlement. They questioned whether he'd provoked Marcus somehow. They tried to paint him as a confused old man seeking attention. Marcus leaned back in his chair during all of this, a slight smirk playing at his lips. When the defense rested, he whispered something to his attorney that made them both chuckle. Judge Thornton's eyes narrowed. She'd been watching him throughout the proceedings, and what she saw disgusted her. "Mr. Caprio," she said suddenly, cutting through the murmur of the courtroom, "do you wish to make a statement?" His attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, we'd prefer. I'm asking your client, counselor." Marcus stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "I think there's been a massive misunderstanding here. Mr. Green is clearly confused about what happened. I barely touched him. If he fell, that's unfortunate, but it's not my fault that he's fragile. I have a promising career ahead of me. This whole thing is being blown out of proportion because of who my father is." The courtroom exploded again. Veterans shouted. Walter's daughter sobbed. Judge Thornton's gavel pounded repeatedly. "Silence." Marcus sat back down, looking pleased with himself, as if he'd just delivered a winning argument rather than condemning himself with every word. Judge Thornton's face had gone ice-cold. She opened her mouth to speak, and then someone stood up in the back of the courtroom. The figure stood slowly in the back corner of the courtroom, where shadows had concealed him throughout the entire trial. Police Chief Richard Caprio. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate despite the lines of exhaustion etched deep into his face. His hair had gone gray over the past 3 weeks. His eyes, red-rimmed, carried the weight of a parent's worst nightmare. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. "Chief Caprio," Judge Thornton said carefully, I didn't realize you were present. I've been here since the beginning, Your Honor." His voice was rough, barely controlled. In the back. Listening. Watching. Marcus turned in his seat, his face draining of color. "Dad, don't." The word cracked like a whip. Richard Caprio walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the silent courtroom. He didn't stop until he stood directly in front of the judge's bench. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Judge Thornton studied him for a long moment. "You may." Richard turned to face his son. The courtroom held its collective breath. "Marcus," he said, and his voice broke on the name. "I have failed you. Not today. Not this week. For years. I've been failing you, and I didn't want to see it." Marcus stared at his father, his arrogance finally cracking. "Dad, what are you? Every time you got in trouble, I fixed it. Every time you showed disrespect, I made excuses. He's young. He'll grow out of it. Boys will be boys. When you crashed your car drunk at 19, I buried the report. When you were caught cheating in college, I called in favors. When you assaulted that bartender last year, I paid him off before he could press charges." The reporters were writing furiously. The courtroom was frozen. "I told myself I was protecting my son. I told myself I was being a good father." Richard's hands trembled. "But I was creating a monster. I was teaching you that power means you're above consequences. That other people don't matter. That an old man's dignity is worthless compared to your convenience." "Dad, please." Marcus's voice was small now, childlike. Richard turned to Walter Green, who sat silent and still in the gallery. "Mr. Green, I can never apologize enough for what my son did to you. You served this country with honor. You built a life of service and dignity. And my boy," his voice broke again, "my boy hurt you because he thought he was entitled to. Because I taught him he was." Tears were streaming down Richard's face now. Veterans in the gallery were wiping their own eyes. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. "Your Honor," Richard said, turning back to Judge Thornton, "I came here today prepared to do what I've always done. I had calls ready to make. Favors ready to call in. I was going to try to get my son's sentence reduced, maybe get him probation, get this whole thing sealed and forgotten." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I even had a resignation letter ready, in case I needed to trade my career for his freedom." "Dad, don't." "But I'm not going to do that." Richard's voice hardened with resolve. "Not anymore. Your Honor, I am asking you, no, I'm begging you, to sentence my son with the full force of the law. Give him the maximum sentence. Don't show him mercy because of who I am. Show him justice, because that's what he needs to learn." The courtroom erupted. Judge Thornton didn't even reach for her gavel. She let the chaos roll through, watching father and son with ancient, knowing eyes. Marcus was openly sobbing now, his carefully constructed mask shattered completely. "Dad, please, you can't. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Richard walked to his son, placed both hands on his shoulders, and looked him directly in the eyes. "I love you, Marcus. I love you more than my career, more than my reputation, more than my own life. But I love you enough to let you face what you've done. Because if I don't, I'll lose you forever, not to prison, but to the entitled, cruel person you're becoming." He kissed his son's forehead as Marcus collapsed into sobs. Then Richard Caprio turned and walked out of the courtroom, his shoulders straight despite the tears streaming down his face. The doors closed behind him with a soft click. Judge Thornton waited until complete silence returned. Then she looked at Marcus Caprio, who sat broken and trembling in his chair, all arrogance gone, replaced by the terrified face of a young man who had finally understood the magnitude of what he'd done. "Mr. Caprio," she said softly, Do you have anything to say? Marcus could barely speak through his sobs. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Judge Margaret Thornton had served justice for over 2 decades, but she'd rarely felt the weight of it as heavily as she did in this moment. Marcus Caprio sat before her, no longer the arrogant young man who'd entered her courtroom. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face tear-stained, his entire body shaking. But more importantly, his eyes, previously cold and dismissive, now held something she'd been waiting to see: genuine remorse. "Marcus Caprio," she began, her voice filling the silent courtroom, "you have been found guilty of felony assault, battery causing serious bodily injury, and elder abuse. These are not minor infractions. These are serious crimes that speak to a fundamental lack of respect for human dignity." She paused, letting her words settle. "I've watched you throughout this trial. I've seen your smirks, your whispers, your complete disregard for Mr. Green's suffering. You came into my courtroom believing that your father's position, your family's wealth, and your own sense of entitlement would protect you." Marcus flinched at each word. "But your father," Judge Thornton continued, her voice softening slightly, "showed more courage in 5 minutes than you've shown in your entire life. He did what few parents have the strength to do. He loved you enough to let you fall." She opened the sentencing guidelines, though she'd already memorized every word. "Marcus Caprio, I hereby sentence you to 4 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years upon demonstration of genuine rehabilitation. Additionally, you will complete 500 hours of community service, specifically working with elderly veterans and assault victims, to be completed after your release." The courtroom remained silent, but the weight of the sentence hung in the air. "Furthermore," Judge Thornton added, "you will undergo mandatory anger management counseling, substance abuse treatment, and you will be required to write a personal letter of apology to Mr. Green, not for this court, not for public consumption, but because you owe him that much as a human being." She looked at Marcus directly. "I'm not sentencing you to destroy your life, Mr. Caprio. I'm sentencing you to save it. Prison will be hard. It will be humbling. It will strip away every privilege you've ever known. But it will also give you something you desperately need: the opportunity to understand what it means to be powerless, to be vulnerable, to be at the mercy of others." Before she could continue, the courtroom doors opened. Police Chief Richard Caprio stood in the doorway. He didn't enter, but his voice carried clearly. "Your Honor, if I may?" Judge Thornton nodded. Richard walked forward, stopping beside his son's table. "Marcus, your mother and I have discussed this extensively. When you complete your sentence, you will not be returning to your old life. Your trust fund has been dissolved. Your apartment has been vacated. Your car has been sold." Marcus looked up at his father, fresh tears forming. "The money from those sales has been donated to veterans organizations in Mr. Green's name," Richard continued. "When you get out, you'll start from scratch. You'll find your own place to live. You'll get a regular job. You'll build a life based on your own work, not our name." He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "We'll still love you. We'll still be your parents. But we won't enable you anymore. You need to learn what real life looks like for people who don't have power to hide behind." Walter Green stood slowly from his seat in the gallery. Every eye turned to him. He walked forward with his cane, each step careful but determined. He stopped a few feet from Marcus. The young man looked up at the elderly veteran he'd so callously hurt, and fresh shame washed over his face. "Mr. Caprio," Walter said softly, his voice carrying decades of wisdom, "I forgive you." Marcus sobbed harder. "Not because what you did was acceptable. Not because it didn't hurt like hell, both physically and in my heart. But because I've seen too much hate in my life. I fought in a war. I've seen what happens when people can't forgive, can't change, can't grow." Walter extended his hand, the one that wasn't in a cast. "I forgive you." And I hope that when you come out of prison, you'll be the man your father believes you can be. The man you should have been all along." Marcus took Walter's hand, shaking it gently, unable to speak through his tears. Walter turned to Judge Thornton. "Your Honor, thank you. For justice. For dignity. For doing what was right instead of what was easy." As bailiffs led Marcus away, he looked back one last time at his father. Richard Caprio stood with tears streaming down his face, but he nodded, a gesture of love, of faith, of painful but necessary goodbye. The courtroom slowly emptied, veterans shaking Walter's hand, reporters rushing to file their stories. But the message was clear. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through truth, accountability, and the difficult, painful love of a father who chose his son's future over his present comfort. Epilogue. 8 months later. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Murphy's corner store, casting familiar patterns across the worn linoleum floor. Marcus Caprio stood behind the counter, wearing a simple blue work shirt and name tag, carefully organizing lottery tickets. His hands, once soft and manicured, now bore calluses from prison work detail. His expensive haircut had grown out into something more ordinary. His eyes, once cold and entitled, now carried a different weight: humility, awareness, caution. The bell above the door chimed. Walter Green walked in, leaning less heavily on his cane than he had months before. His ribs had healed. His wrist was still weak but functional. But more than his physical wounds, something else had healed, his faith that justice could still prevail. Marcus looked up and immediately stood straighter. "Mr. Green." "Good morning, sir." "Marcus." Walter nodded. "You're still working here, I see." "Yes, sir. 5 days a week. Mr. Murphy gave me a chance when nobody else would." Marcus's voice was different now, quieter, more careful, more genuine. "I'm also taking night classes. Community college. Social work." Walter raised his eyebrows. "Social work?" "Yes, sir. I want to work with troubled kids. Kids like I was. Maybe I can help them before they—" He trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging between them. Walter walked to the counter. "Coffee. Black. And one of those Danishes." "Right away, sir." Marcus moved efficiently, his hands steady. He poured the coffee carefully, selected the freshest Danish, rang up the purchase. "That'll be $4.50. Walter handed him a 5. "Keep the change." "Thank you, sir." As Walter turned to leave, he paused. "Marcus." "Yes, sir." "You've got a long road ahead of you. People won't forget. Some won't forgive. It'll be hard for a long, long time." Marcus nodded, his face accepting this truth. "I know, sir. But," Walter continued, his weathered face softening slightly, "I've seen real change in people before. Not often, but sometimes. You keep walking this path. You keep doing the work. You keep remembering what you learned." "I will, sir. I promise. Every day I remember. Every day I try to be better." Walter studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That's all any of us can do." He walked out into the morning sunshine, the bell chiming behind him. Marcus stood alone in the store, looking at the spot where he'd committed his crime 8 months ago. The display had been repaired. The floor had been cleaned. But he would always see what had happened there. He would carry it forever. His phone buzzed. A text from his father. "Proud of you, son. Keep going. Love, Dad." Marcus typed back with fingers that trembled slightly. "Thank you. I won't let you down again." He looked out the window at the small town that had watched him fall, watched him be held accountable, and now watched with cautious, skeptical hope as he tried to rebuild himself from nothing. The bell chimed again. A customer entered. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice steady. How can I help you? One day at a time. One customer at a time. One apology lived rather than spoken. One choice to be better than he'd been. It wasn't redemption yet. Maybe it never would be. But it was a start. And sometimes a start is everything.